Hello my dear students, today is the fourth and the last lecture of the joints anatomy. Lecture 1 was about the joint classification and synarthrosis, cartilaginous and fibrous joints. Lecture 2 was about the basic characteristics, basic properties, basic components of the cavitated joints. Lecture 3 was about the morphological classification and the axis determination. With the help of these three basic lectures, I will guide you how you will apply this knowledge in your gross anatomy joints. When you will write down when you have to write down a short essay question or you have to solve an MCQ, what will be the protocol, what will be the simple rules to describe the gross anatomy joint of any region. This will help you in description of the joints in any of the region of the gross anatomy, any cavitated joint. I'll talk about that simple rules. What you will write down when you're asked about the definition, when you're asked about the capsule, about the articulation, about the synovial membrane and the bursa, and about the ligaments. What you will write down when you're asked about the stability of a joint, stability factor of a joint, and then what common rule you will follow to write down the blood supply of a joint, what common rule you will follow to write down the nerve supply of any joint. And in the end, I'll talk about the movements and mechanism involved in the action of the muscles, how these are involved in different movements over a joint. And at the end of the lecture, I'll give you a special reward. The special reward will help you a lot in the revision of your gross anatomy joints of the upper limb and the lower limb. So now, let's watch this lecture.
First of all, the definition of a gross anatomy joint. Keep in mind, this is most frequently asked in your MCQ part of the exam about the definition of the joint. But what is definition of the joint? Who will tell us about the definition of the joint? The answer is general anatomy. Definition of a joint is introduction of a joint. Think about what will come into your mind when you will be asked about introducing an object or introducing a subject. You will talk about the characteristics, you will talk about the properties. And about the properties of the joints, I have described in detail in my general anatomy joints lecture. Our general anatomy classifies the joint into different categories. We have to decide about the morphological category. What is the morphological category of a joint which is being asked? We have to decide about the axis. What is the axis of that joint that is being asked? That is uniaxial, biaxial or a multi-axial joint. Then we have to decide about, is it a simple joint? Is it a compound joint or is it a complex joint? Then we have to comment about the movability, how movable the joint is. I will explain shortly. Then we have to comment upon the stability, how stable the joint is that is being asked. Answer to all these questions is present in your gross anatomy books, and I will remind you again that this will become the mostly asked part of the MCQs. Now let me quote you the example. For example, when you have to define the shoulder joint, when you have to introduce the shoulder joint, what you will write down? You will think about the morphological classification and you will say that it's a ball and socket joint. After that, you have to answer about the axis. You will say that it's a multi-axial joint. After that, you have to choose between the simple, compound and complex category, and the shoulder joint is a simple joint between two bones. After that, you have to decide about the movability. Shoulder joint is a highly movable joint. And keep in mind, generally, when a joint is highly movable, it's less stable. It's relatively less stable. So the shoulder joint is relatively less stable because the bony surface doesn't fit a lot. The socket is shallow. The socket is not deep and the ball is big. Humerus head is big. So in this way, you will introduce a joint. Now let me quote another example. For example, the elbow joint. How you will introduce the elbow joint? You will say that elbow joint is a hinge variety of the joint on the basis of shape. On the basis of axis, you will say that it's a uniaxial joint. On the basis of simple, compound and complex, you will say it's a compound joint made by more than two bones. About movability, you will say that yes, it's movable. It's movable, not highly movable, not less movable, moderately movable. About stability, you will say that it's a stable joint, not highly stable, not less stable, moderately stable joint. Now I want to tell you an important rule. The important rule is that morphological categories have been assigned an axis. You all know, I have described in my previous videos, morphological categories has been assigned the axis. For example, ball and socket. You know, ball and socket is a multi-axial joint. Then is the hinge joint. You know, hinge joint is a uni-axial joint. Then is the ellipsoidal joint. You know that ellipsoidal joint is biaxial joint. Then what is the important fact? What is the rule? The rule is that if you decide on the basis of shape that this is a hinge variety of the joint, but that joint is not uni-axial, it has got more than two sets of movement, then you are thinking wrong. It's not a hinge variety of the joint. It's an other variety. You have to think again. For example, you are thinking about a joint on the basis of the shape. You decide it's an ellipsoidal joint. Then it must be biaxial. It's a condition. Ellipsoidal joint must be biaxial. Hinge joint must be uniaxial. And a ball and socket joint must be multi-axial joint. A condylar joint must be biaxial joint. A saddle joint must be biaxial joint. A pivot joint must be uniaxial joint. These are conditioned pairs. Now the articulation. Whenever you are asked about articulation of a joint, what you have to answer? Watch this video first.
Now I will guide you about the articulation. Whenever you are asked a question about articulation in your exam, in your viva, what you have to answer. Note down, the articular surface is only the part of the bone that is actually in contact with each other during movement. And those surfaces in the shoulder joint are glenoid cavity and the head of humerus. That's it. You have to mention only the parts that are in contact. You cannot say the upper end of the humerus participates in the articulation. It's not the upper end. It's only the head of the humerus whose circumference, whose boundary is the anatomical neck. So this only will participate in the articulation, and glenoid cavity only will participate in the articulation. Although the labrum that is present over the margin will deepen the cavity and will participate in articulation, that's the other part, but never mention the extra parts in the articulation. At the end, in the articulation paragraph, you will add one important sentence, and that one important sentence is articular surfaces are lined by hyaline cartilage. Never forget this sentence when you are asked the articulation. Articular surfaces are lined by hyaline cartilage. But there is one tricky point in this. That point is that whenever a joint cavity has got intra-articular disc, the lining cartilage will not be hyaline cartilage. The lining cartilage will be fibrocartilage. If you have a intra-articular disc inside a joint, the joint articular surfaces will not be lined by hyaline cartilage, they will be lined by fibrocartilage. For example, the temporomandibular joint. For example, the sternoclavicular joint. These joints have got intra-articular disc.
You have watched the video and I will add just one single sentence. Whenever you are done with articulation, you have to write down the last sentence. The last sentence is that articular surfaces are lined by hyaline cartilage. And if the cavity has got a disc, the hyaline cartilage will be replaced by fibrocartilage. Look at here, we have got two bones that make a contact, that is a joint. And for the sake of articulation, the in contact surfaces, the actually in contact surfaces, articular surfaces are lined by hyaline cartilage. Now what is the function of a capsule? You know that function of the capsule is to convert this area into a cavity like this. Now this area is a closed area, closed cavity with the help of a capsule. Here comes the important most question. How close a capsule can be with these articular surfaces? How close a capsule can be? What do you think? Capsule can be here? Yes, capsule can be here. Capsule can be here? Yes, there is no issue. It can still make a cavity. But the issue is, what if the capsule is here? in touch with the articular surfaces. Will there be a movement? Will there be a movement? No, there will not be a movement. For the sake of movement, it's a condition that capsule must be away from the articular margins. Whether millimeter away, it must be away from the articular margin. It must be away from the articular margin. If it is inside the articular margin, there will be issue with the movement. There will be problem with the movement. So the capsule function is to convert it into a cavity, and it must be away from the articular margin. It cannot be inside the articular margin. Here comes the important most sentence that you have to write down. Whatever you know about the attachment of the capsule, you will write down attachment of the capsule. At the end, you will write down capsule is attached away from the articular margins. This is important. Now the second most important fact about the capsule is that what it includes, what part of the bone are included by the capsule, what part of the bone are excluded by the capsule. For example, this is a tubercle or tuberosity of a bone. If capsule is attached away from the articular margin in a way that it excludes this tubercle, you have to mention this fact that this part is outside the capsule. Here we have got a tubercle or any other bony impression. If capsule is attached in this way, now it includes this impression inside. This is now inside the cavity. So you have to mention this. You have to mention what is excluded. You have to mention what is included during the capsule attachment. Now watch this video so your concept become more clear.
This is the scapula bone, glenoid cavity, and this is the humerus bone head. Glenoid cavity is lined with the hyaline cartilage. This is the articular surface. Humerus head is lined with hyaline cartilage as it is the articular surface. There is the capsule. Capsule must be away from the articular margin. Whenever you are asked about a capsule, you write down that capsule is attached in a way that it includes following structures and it excludes following structures. So the included structures and the excluded structures are very much important when you are asked about the joint capsule attachment. First thing you will say is the capsule is attached away from the articular margins. Second thing that you will say that it excludes lesser tubercle. Lesser tubercle is outside cavity. It excludes greater tubercle. Greater tubercle is outside cavity. Likewise, in this side of the attachment of the capsule, you will say that capsule doesn't include infraglenoid tubercle. Capsule includes supraglenoid tubercle. Only infraglenoid tubercle is outside cavity. This is important. Keep in mind. Now look at here. I will give one more example how to describe the attachment of a capsule. This is the elbow joint between humerus, ulna and the radius. You know, articular surfaces are the trochlea and the trochlear notch, capitulum and the radial head superior aspect. These are the articular surfaces, and this joint will be converted into a cavity with the help of a capsule. Function of the capsule is to form a cavity, and the attachment of the capsule must be away from the articular margin. Second important thing that you have to mention what is included and what is excluded, because included things will be inside the cavity and excluded things will be outside the cavity. Look at this bone. This is the humerus bone. What is included by the capsule inside the cavity is the coronoid fossa above the trochlea, is the radial fossa above the capitulum. These are included inside the cavity. Likewise, this is the olecranon fossa which will be included by the capsule. What is excluded? The important excluded parts of the bone. The important parts that are excluded by the capsule are the medial epicondyle and the lateral epicondyle. Medial epicondyle and lateral epicondyle are outside joint cavity. Because capsule attachment is here, it will exclude this epicondyle. So this is all about the capsule attachment, and I have told you the point that you have to be careful about.
Now the synovial membrane and bursa. This I have already described you in my previous videos. I will not go into details, but I will add some important points for your short essay question. If the synovial membrane and bursa comes into your SCQ, what you will write? About synovial membrane, you will add a simple sentence that the synovial membrane lies inside of the capsule. This is a simple sentence that you should not forget. What about bursa? What to write in bursa? At your level, it's enough that you enumerate bursa. You just make a list of the bursas around the joint, but classify that bursa into communicating and non-communicating bursa. That's it. That's enough for you. Now coming to the ligaments. This is the most frequently asked part in your short essay question. You are asked about ligaments most frequently. But there is the tricky point about the ligaments that I am told you when I am telling you about the capsule. Capsule is ligament number 1. Write down. Capsule is ligament number 1. Why I asked you to write down capsule is ligament number 1? Because when you are asked about ligaments of a joint, write down a note on the ligaments of the joint, you have to mention about the capsule first. It's not necessary the examiner asks you that write down a note on the capsule and ligaments. It's enough for the examiner to ask about the ligaments. If his question is about the ligaments of a synovial joint, you will first give the heading of capsule, because capsule is ligament number 1. Then comes the other ligaments. Now I will classify the ligaments into different categories. This will help you in solving the short essay question. Ligament can be a primary ligament. An articular ligament can be a primary ligament, and it can be a accessory ligament. So what is the difference between primary and the accessory ligament? Primary ligament is the capsule, and other ligaments that merge with capsule or are just the thickening of the capsule related with capsule, the ligaments are the primary ligaments. What are the accessory ligament? The accessory ligament doesn't make connection with the capsule, no connection with the capsule, but they are involved in the stability and the protection of the joint. So the ligaments are accessory ligaments. Now look at here. This is the wrist joint between the radius and the carpal bone. Here we have got the capsule, and you can note down we have got some ligaments that are attached to the capsule. We can say they are thickening of the capsule, or the lateral part, the thickening is known as radial collateral ligament, or the medial part, the thickening is known as ulnar collateral ligament, or the front part, these bands, the thickenings are known as the palmar radiocarpal ligament. We will have dorsal radiocarpal ligament over the dorsal aspect. So all these are the primary ligaments. Capsule is ligament number 1, then these are the primary ligaments. Look at here, this is the elbow joint. Here we have got the capsule which will form the cavity. You can note down we have got an ulnar collateral ligament and a radial collateral ligament. We have got the capsule. So these two ligaments, ulnar collateral ligament and the radial collateral ligament, are the primary ligaments of the elbow joint. Note down this ligament which is away from the capsule. This will be labeled as the accessory ligament. This is the annular ligament. Now look at here, this is a diagram of the shoulder joint which has got a capsular ligament. This is the capsular ligament of the shoulder joint. We have to differentiate between the primary ligaments and the accessory ligament. The primary ligament is the capsule and the ligament that are derived from the capsule, that are the thickening of the capsule. We have got 3 primary ligaments inside of the capsule. They can be seen from the inside of the capsule. These are 3 glenohumeral ligaments starting from the glycine side of the capsule towards the humeral tubercles. These 3 bands of the ligaments are supposed to derive from the capsule, so these are also the primary ligaments. Look at here, this is the bicep long head which is present in the intertubercular groove. This intertubercular groove is converted into a tunnel with the help of this ligament here. This is the transverse humeral ligament which converts the intertubercular groove into a tunnel. Look at here, this is also the bicep tendon. You can note down coming from the supraglenoid tubercle, this bicep tendon is present inside the joint cavity. It has to exit the joint cavity. Look at here, it has to exit the joint cavity. The long head of the bicep exits here, but before the exit, it is present in the tunnel made by the transverse humeral ligament. The transverse humeral ligament is the thickening of the capsule. So the transverse humeral ligament is also the primary ligament of the shoulder joint. Now the accessory ligament of the shoulder joint. Look at here, this is the coracoid process and this is the acromion process. Between the coracoid process and the acromion process, we have got a ligament. This is the coracoacromial ligament. This is the coracoacromial ligament which is not related with the capsule, but in case shoulder joint gets unstable and dislocated towards the superior aspect, this coracoacromial ligament will protect this dislocation. So this is involved in stability of the joint, and the coracoacromial ligament is the accessory ligament of the shoulder joint. Another ligament which is an accessory ligament of the shoulder joint present here, we can see this is the ligament starting from the coracoid process till the humerus bone. This is the coracohumeral ligament. This coracohumeral ligament is also the accessory ligament of the shoulder joint. Now I will repeat, whenever you are asked about a ligament in your short essay question, you will first write down capsule, which is a primary ligament, then you will mention other primary ligament, and then you will mention the accessory ligament of that joint. The next heading that I will discuss now is the blood supply of a joint. You already know that we have got a joint between the bones. We have got major arteries running from here. Then you know that major arteries make contact with the proximal and distal parts. With the proximal and distal part, this we label as anastomosis around a joint. And always keep in mind, this anastomosis around a joint is the blood supply of the joint. All of you know about the anastomosis around shoulder joint, anastomosis around the elbow joint, wrist joint, anastomosis around the hip joint and the knee joint and the ankle joint. So whenever you are asked about the blood supply of a joint, just write down the anastomosis around that joint. Very simple. The next heading about the description of a gross anatomy joint is nerve supply of the joint. Whenever you are asked about the nerve supply of a joint, you get confused, you forget about the nerves that you learned through rata. Never go for rata. Always remember, we have got a joint, around it we have got the muscles. There will be nerves that are going to supply those muscles, and those nerves which will supply these muscles will be the nerve supply of the joint as well. Very simple. I'll repeat, we have got joints, we have got joints, we have got joints. Around the joints we have got muscles. Muscles will have nerve supply. Just remember that nerve supply and repeat those nerves whenever you are asked the nerve supply of the joint. This law is known as the Hilton's law. This rule of nerve supply is given by John Hamilton centuries ago. He stated that the nerves supplying the muscles extending directly across the joint and acting at a given joint will also innervate the joint and skin overlying the joint. With the help of this rule, never get worried about the nerve supply of a joint and write down those nerves. Now coming to the most important part of my lecture today. The most important part of my lecture today is movements at the joint. Why it is most important, I'll tell you at the end. It has got a hidden reward for you. Just wait a while. Whenever you think about muscle action over a joint, the two basic questions come into your mind. The two basic questions are, does the muscle act on this joint? The second question is that, what action or movement the muscle will produce at the joint? Answer to these two questions will clear most of your concepts about the muscle actions and will help you a lot throughout your medical year. Now I will answer one by one. First, the question number 1. Does the muscle act on this joint? Answer to this question is another question. Another question is, has the muscle crossed that joint or not? If the muscle has crossed that joint, it will produce movement. If the muscle hasn't crossed the joint, it can never produce movement at the joint. Let me demonstrate with the help of diagram. Just follow me in this sketch. We have a bone X, we have a bone Y, and we have a bone Z. X and Y make a joint and we label that joint as A. Y and Z make a joint and we label that joint as B. Now let me draw some muscles here. I will label these muscles at muscle number 1, muscle number 2 and muscle number 3. You can note down that muscle number 1 starts at the bone X and ends at the bone X. Muscle number 2 starts at bone X and ends at bone Y. Muscle number 3 starts at bone X and ends at bone Z. Now think about the action of these muscles. What do you think? If muscle number 1 will contract, will it produce movement at any joint? The answer is no. It cannot produce a movement at any joint because it's starting from bone and ending at the same bone. Now look at this muscle number 2, which is starting at bone X and ending at bone Y and crossing the joint A. When this muscle will contract, this will lead to movement at the joint A. Yes. So write down the rule. For producing a muscle action at a joint, it has to cross the joint. It will cross the joint, then it will produce the action over that joint. Now look at muscle number 3, starting from bone X and ending at bone Z. It has crossed both joint number A and joint number B. When it will contract, it can produce movement at B and it can produce movement at B. It is possible, yes, because it has crossed two joints. It doesn't matter how many joints have been crossed. If a muscle cross 3 joints, it will produce movement at 3 joints. If a muscle cross 1 joint, it will produce movement at the 1 joint. This is the rule that for producing movement at a joint, muscle has to cross the joint. Now the question number 2. What action or movement a muscle will produce at a joint? A muscle has crossed the joint. Now comes question number 2. What action or movement a muscle will produce? Answer to this question is another question. What is this question is how the muscle has crossed. How the muscle has crossed a joint. It has crossed, but how it has crossed? There are 6 kind of movement and there are 6 patterns how a muscle will cross. Let me demonstrate here. Wait a while. First I will give you easy description, a simple description of the movement categories. Look at here. If we cut the body here, cross section of the body here, transverse cross section, we will have this kind of sketch. The arm with humerus bone at periphery, arm with humerus bone at periphery, and in the center we have got the body. This is the midline of the body. Now look at the movements of the humerus bone. What kind of movement a humerus bone can have? It can move back. Yes, this is the extension of the humerus bone or arm. It can move forward. Yes, this is the flexion of the arm. It can move outward away from the midline. Yes, that is the abduction movement. It can move towards the midline. Yes, it can move towards midline, and that is the adduction movement. You can note down these movements are described with the help of planes and they make an angle with the planes. So these 4 are the angular movements. Now I will demonstrate what must be the location of the muscle, what must be the suitable location of the muscle to produce extension, to produce flexion, to produce abduction, to produce adduction. Moving back is the extension. So for this movement, a muscle must cross the joint from back side. Here must be the muscle. Moving towards front is the flexion. Yes, it is flexion. For this movement, a muscle must cross the joint from the front side. That will produce flexion. Moving outward is the abduction. For this movement, a muscle must cross the joint from the outside direction, from the outer aspect. So it will produce abduction. This is the adduction moving inward, and a muscle that will be present inside of the joint, that will cross the joint from inside, will produce this adduction movement. So muscle has got 4 options and 4 movements here. Now coming to the third pair of movement, that is medial rotation and the lateral rotation. Note down, rotation is not an angular movement, it is the rotation of the bone along its own axis. The bone may rotate into a clockwise direction and into an anti-clockwise direction if the joint permits. Bone may rotate into anti-clockwise and a clockwise direction. This is the humerus of the right side and this is the humerus of the left side. Now note down what is medial rotation. Medial rotation is inward rotation. Note down what is medial rotation. Medial rotation is inward rotation. When right sided humerus moves inward, note down it's the anti-clockwise movement. For right sided it is anti-clockwise, and for left side when it moves inward, it rotates inward, it will be clockwise rotation. So with the reference of the clockwise and anti-clockwise, we cannot define medial and lateral rotation. So we will use the term inward and outward. Moving inward, rotational movement inward is the medial rotation and rotational movement outward is the lateral rotation. I will repeat, medial rotation is the rotation inward and lateral rotation is the rotation outward. So just remember these 2 words for the medial and the lateral rotation. because each movement is clockwise on one side and anti-clockwise on the other side. Now I will demonstrate what kind of muscle will produce medial rotation and what kind of muscle will produce the lateral rotation. What should be the orientation of the muscle to produce these two movements. We have a muscle here over the back side of the body wall, and this muscle ends here or the front of the humerus. This is the muscle. What do you think when this muscle will contract, what it will produce? It will produce the inward rotation. It will produce the inward rotation. That is the medial rotation. Such kind of muscle in the shoulder joint is subscapularis muscle. Now I will show you the muscle that will produce the lateral rotation. We have a muscle that starts over the front of the body wall and moves toward the back side of the bone. This is the muscle. What do you think when this muscle will contract, what it will produce? It will produce this kind of movement, and this kind of rotational movement is known as the lateral rotation. So now we know that there are 6 patterns a muscle can cross a joint, and there are 6 kind of movement a muscle can produce. Now watch this video so your concept becomes more clear.
Look at here, this is the shoulder joint between the glenoid cavity of the scapula and the humerus head. You already know for producing muscle at this joint, a muscle has to cross the joint. But what muscle will produce flexion and extension, abduction and adduction, and medial and lateral rotation? What should be the orientation of the muscle? I will demonstrate basically the orientation at this model now. So we have got a muscle. This is the muscle crossing the joint from the front. Note down what will happen when this muscle will contract. This will lead to flexion. It's crossing from the front. We have got a muscle that is crossing the joint from the back side. What will happen when this muscle will come into action? Note down. It will cause extension. Muscle crossing from the back side will lead to extension. Now we have got a muscle that is crossing the joint from the outer aspect, not from front, not from back side. When this muscle will come into action, like supraspinatus muscle, like deltoid muscle, when this muscle will contract, this will produce abduction. You can note down this. This will produce abduction. Note down again. This will produce abduction. They are crossing from the outer side. Now we have got muscle that are crossing the joint from the inner side. This is abduction, and when the inner side muscle will contract, like latissimus dorsi, coming from this aspect and attach over the intertubercle groove. Teres major muscle coming from this side and attach over the intertubercle groove. These are the examples. When these muscles will contract, what will happen? Adduction. What will happen? Adduction. But there is a tricky point. Note down. This is the abduction and this is adduction. This is the abduction and this is adduction. Adduction is under the action of gravity. There is no role of the muscle until we require more power. Otherwise, for smooth adduction, we just have to control the movement, and adduction is under the action of the gravity. And now the third pair of movement, that is medial rotation and the lateral rotation. What is medial rotation? Rotation of the humerus towards inner side. What is lateral rotation? Rotation of the humerus towards outer side. Just look at the lesser tubercle. It is getting inside, medial rotation. It is coming outside, lateral rotation. Now what should be the orientation of the muscles that will produce medial rotation and the lateral rotation? We have got muscle that starts from the front of the scapula, and we have got muscle that starts from the back of the scapula. A muscle that starts from front of the scapula, subscapular fossa, and at the has got attachment over the lesser tubercle is the subscapularis muscle. So this is the muscle. What do you think when the subscapularis will contract? What it will produce? It will produce medial rotation. Again note down, muscle will contract, it will lead to medial rotation. Now I'll talk about the lateral rotation. We have got muscle that is starting from the scapula back, infraspinatus, and also the teres minor muscle. These two muscles move toward the greater tubercle. So we have got a muscle that is the infraspinatus and the teres minor muscle. Starting from here, they are attached over the greater tubercle. What do you think when they will contract? They will bring the humerus outward. These muscles will contract, they will rotate the humerus outward. That is the lateral rotation of the shoulder joint. So these 6 movements are related with the orientation of the muscles, how the muscles cross the joint from all sides. And in the cut section of the joint in your book, there are diagrams about the cut section of the joint. The purpose of those diagrams is that you make a concept and then memorize the muscles causing that movement. Now I will show you the movement at the hip joint. This is the hip joint present between the femur head and the acetabulum formed by the hip bones. This is the hip joint. This is a multi-axial joint, ball and socket type of joint. We have got 6 kind of movements here. I will demonstrate you what should be the orientation of the muscles for producing these 6 movements. If this is a muscle which has crossed the joint, it will produce movement at the joint, but it has crossed the joint from the front. So what will happen when this muscle will contract? Look at here. This muscle will contract and this will lead to flexion because it is crossing the joint from the front side. Now look at here, we have a muscle that is crossing the joint from the back side. What will happen when this muscle crossing from the back side will contract? It will produce extension. Again, look at here. If we have a muscle that is crossing the joint from the outer aspect, not from front, not from back side, but from the outer aspect, what will happen when this muscle will contract? Look at here, this muscle will contract and it will produce the abduction at the hip joint. This will produce the abduction at the hip joint. Okay. What about the adductors at the hip joint? Who will produce adduction at hip joint? So down we have got muscle or the medial side crossing the joint from the medial aspect. This is the muscle. This is abduction, and when this muscle will contract, it will produce adduction. This is abduction, and when this muscle will contract, this will produce adduction. Again, you have to note down another point that this is abduction, and adduction is the function of gravity. We are using gravity during the adduction. So whenever you are asked about write down muscles causing the adduction, you write down gravity first, because gravity is the major factor during the adduction at hip joint as well. Now you can correlate these movements with the orientation of the muscle, how they are crossing the hip joint in this cross section. That's why these kind of cross sections are present in your books, and these are important for making this concept.
Look at here, this is the wrist joint. Here we can easily demonstrate about the relationship between orientation of the muscles and their action. Now I will draw the cross section of the wrist joint. This is the cross section of the wrist joint. We have muscles that cross the joint from front. We have muscles that cross the joint from the back side. At the wrist joint, we have got flexion, we have got extension, we have got the radial deviation, and we have got the ulnar deviation. Ulnar deviation is the adduction and radial deviation is the abduction. We have got flexor carpi radialis on the front radial side, and we have got flexor carpi ulnaris on the front ulnar side. In the center, we have got the palmaris longus muscle. These are the muscles of the superficial group. On the dorsal side, radial aspect, we have got extensor carpi radialis longus and extensor carpi radialis brevis. Likewise, over the ulnar side, we have got an extensor, that is the extensor carpi ulnaris muscle. Now I will draw these muscles over this cross section. We have got flexor carpi radialis muscle. We have got extensor carpi radialis longus and extensor carpi radialis brevis muscle. Here we have got flexor carpi ulnaris muscle, and here we have got the extensor carpi ulnaris muscle. And in the center here we have got the palmaris longus muscle. I will show you how these muscles work in action to produce 4 movements. We have got muscles over the 2 sides, but we have got 4 movements over the wrist joint: flexion, extension, abduction and adduction. For the sake of flexion, all the muscles on the front form a team, and when they contract, we will have flexion over the wrist joint. For the sake of extension, the muscles over the back make a team. They will contract at a time. When they will contract at a time, extensor capillaris, extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis, we will have extension at the wrist joint. Now what about the ulnar deviation and the radial deviation? Look at here. For the sake of ulnar deviation, the flexor capillaris and the extensor capillaris will make a team. They will contract at the same time to produce the ulnar deviation. Likewise, over the radial side, flexor carpi radialis and extensor carpi radialis longus and extensor carpi radialis brevis, these three muscles will make a team and will contract at a time, and we will have the radial deviation. Now you can easily understand, when the muscles on front make a team and contract, we will have flexion. When muscles on the back make a team and contract, we will have extension. When the muscles over the radial margin make a team and contract, we will have radial deviation. And when muscles over the ulnar side make a team and contract at the same time, we will have ulnar deviation. Now I will demonstrate the very important concept. What is sentence? You will write down how you will speak about the action of a muscle over a joint. In routine, you say flexion of the arm, you say flexion of the forearm. This is wrong term. Keep in mind, this is the wrong term. For example, the action of the bicep muscle, you will not say flexion of the arm. You will say flexion at wrist joint. Bicep causes flexion at wrist joint. Likewise, you will not say that deltoid causes abduction of the shoulder joint. This is not the right way. Right way is deltoid causes abduction at shoulder joint. So two things are important, two words are important. At the joint. This is very much important. Never say flexion extension of leg or thigh. Specify the joint. The movement is at the knee joint, the movement is at the ankle joint, or the movement is at the shoulder joint. You have to specify the movement at the joint. So keep in mind, this is the anatomical language you have to follow.
And now I will tell you about the extra benefit that you will get by learning the joint anatomy through this technique of mine. You will get rid of this table. This table is not recommended for easy and conceptual learning. It needs a lot of time and forgets in seconds because it's pure rote learning. Look at this table of joint, movements and muscles responsible. You can easily memorize these tables by looking at the movements at the joint and how the muscles are crossing from all the sides. This will make a concept and you can easily memorize the action of the muscle. Keep in mind, there are more than 50 muscles in the upper limb and the lower limb. If you go for memorizing each muscle separately, it's very difficult. There are only 5 main joints in the upper limb and lower limb. Now the choice is yours. You go for pure rote learning or you go for conceptual learning. Now look at this table. This is the work of my student who first learned the basics of the joint anatomy and then with a single concept, with a single mind, summarize all the joints of the lower limb. You can also do this. This is an amazing technique of learning anatomy. Things will be very easy for you. You should summarize and make your own tables by revising all these 4 lectures and you will be able to answer any question regarding the general anatomy of the joints, regarding the gross anatomy of any joint from any region. So good luck to you students.